Hi, this is Nicole Rivera, and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast. Last week, I was talking about how I'm trying to find a critique crew in the Stop Writing Alone community so that I can get a second set of eyes on my writing and help writers to find that for themselves. But there are times when you look at your own writing and you don't need a second set of eyes. You just know it sucks. That's what I'm going to talk about this week. In November of this year, I came down with a seriously terrible case of the shingles, and it threw me for a loop in so many different ways. I was really having a lot of fun in the fall, wrapping up the draft of the Stop Writing Alone book, and I was looking forward to a whole new writing project that I had sort of been playing around with in Story Club. And I was looking forward to NaNoWriMo, but once I got sick, I had nothing. I had nothing in me. And I felt really down after I had come out of the illness, that I had let myself down, let my writing down, let the community down, because I couldn't show up. I just couldn't show up in all the different ways. And so finding my way back to my writing, the podcast, everything was quite difficult. And as I was sort of stumbling around in the dark and trying to find a reason to get back to work, I got an email from one of my old favorites, the NYC Midnight Contest, and they were having a really quick 250 word writing contest. And that's one of those that's like, they give you the prompt and you have 24 hours to write a story. And I looked at it and I thought, you know what? I'm going to tear off the Band-Aid. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into this contest, write for 24 hours intensely, and that's going to bring me back to my writing game. Because every time I was sitting down to write for myself, it wasn't enough. And I don't know if anybody else has these issues like I do, but doing things for just me, I still struggle with that. I still struggle with that being enough. So here was this contest, which, it's like this weird game we play with ourselves. It's still just for me. I don't understand why it works. But anyway, contest comes around. I get the prompt, and it was weird. What was it? I had to write a romance. I don't think it was romantic comedy. No, romance. And the item was a replica. Or you had to include replica, and it had to be, the setting was an attic, right? So those were the three things that I had: romance, replica, and attic. And so I came up with this whole story idea in my head of an attic in a school, which I've written in this setting before, an attic in a school. I guess because I used to work in a very old school, so I was fascinated by its secret spaces, where an art teacher kept replicas of museums that she would use in her classroom. But I wrote this story. I'm trying not to laugh right now. I wrote the story from the point of view of the attic. I wrote it in second person point of view, as if I was writing to the art teacher saying how I, the attic, watched this romance unfold in 250 words. Okay? 250 words, all of that. And I still to this day have this very vivid sort of tale of what happened there, and this love story that happened between this art teacher and this gym teacher over the course of a year, a semester. I don't remember what the timeline was. And I wrote the story, and when you have 24 hours, you write a draft, you rewrite it, you have to get it to the 250 words, and I submitted it. Okay. Time passes as it does, and it did do the job. That was enough to sort of wake me back up and get me reconnected to all my things. I was like, I have fun creating that experience in my brain and writing that story and submitting it. And I don't know how much time passes by. And one of the members of Stop Writing Alone, Quintus Ashby wrote in, I guess it was uh, in our goals. We were talking about our goals or something. And he's like, yeah, and I'm really looking forward to the results of the 250 word contest that I entered to see if I get into round 2. And I read it and I was like, wait a second. I think I did that. Was that the thing that I did? Could not for the life of me remember the story that I wrote. I had to go into Submittable I found the title, didn't trigger anything for me. And then used the title to search my computer and found the story, opened it up and read the 250 words. And I was like, what the hell is this? What is this? And this was before the results came back. I read the story 3 or 4 times over. And it jogged my memory to what I was trying to do. But I could not find it in those 250 words until I remembered my issue with Lemony Snicket many, many years ago, when Lemony Snicket and the Series of Unfortunate Events came out. There was an incredibly popular series. It still is, but like when it kind of came out the gate running, kids were loving this series. And I was still teaching at the time. And I said, well, I better find out what this is if all the students are going to come in knowing what this is. And I sat down to read the books and I was like, I don't get it. I can't get hooked until I listened to the audiobook. And I believe it was read by Tim Curry. And it was hilarious. And I was like, wow, this is an incredible story that my brain couldn't read. I couldn't process it. So I remembered the Lemony Snicket thing while reading my 250 word story. And I said, maybe if I read it aloud to myself, it'll make sense. And I tried reading it aloud, didn't work, but then I recorded myself reading it. And I finally could find something. However, in the end, that's not a success for me. This is no judgment on Lemony Snicket. I still feel like an uneducated reader that I was unable to read that and get it for myself. My 250 words, I was like, this is terrible, right? So I had at the end of the week, the results were coming back. And I said, one of 2 things is going to happen here. Either it's going to be a Lemony Snicket thing where somebody else really gets it and it's brilliant, or it's as terrible as it seems. And so first thing that comes in from NYC Midnight is whether or not you make it into the top 10. And I did not. And I was like, okay, it is terrible. At least I can judge that for myself. And then the feedback came in and it was exactly all of the things that I felt were missing when I read the story myself. It was an awkward story. It was great. I mean, it's really fantastic that it was so awkward and I submitted it. I still can't believe it. I didn't have a choice. It was 24 hours. The deadline hit. I guess I could have not submitted and said, I can't do this, but whatever. I submitted it and it was terrible. So the next question has to be like, what do you do? What do you do when you have this moment where your writing is objectively terrible? I mean, let's just call it for what it is. Objectively terrible. Now, the first thing I can do, especially this is like a completed story. I didn't have this isn't a passion project of mine that I need to work at it to make it the best it can be. This is something I wrote for, I submitted it. It's done. So what can I do with this? I can absolutely let this one go. I can walk away from it and say, done. It was terrible. Let's forget it ever happened. Let's move on with life. The other thing I can do, if I do want to sit and sort of revise it, and like I said, this is a sort of scenario that does live in my brain now, is take a look at the format. One of the things that is really intriguing to me about this particular story is that it feels very visual to me. Like I could see it being something played out. So it could be a screenplay. And that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, how could I rewrite this as a screenplay? I could, and probably should, if I want to keep it in a short story form, change the POV. The POV from the perspective of an addict, maybe not a great idea. But I'll give you I'm just going to say this. One of the reasons that I thought it was a good idea is because I wanted a long amount of time to pass in 250 words. So I figured the addict would only see short snippets of this relationship. Whatever, Nicole, stop arguing it. And then the other thing that I, think about is the length. I was very limited with 250 words. It is possible that this particular story, this story idea, was inappropriate for the constraints of the word length. So this is just something that I want to sort of point out to writers. If you are working within certain constraints and you find that your story is not working, give yourself the freedom to understand you can change that if you're not writing for a particular place that has these constraints. But also, if you are, right, there are certain story ideas that don't lend themselves to those constraints. This is a perfect example. What happens if you try to force it like I did? It's not gonna land. So yeah, those are definitely things that can be done in terms of revision or letting it go. But I think what's really important to me is that I always thank the story and the writing and the experience for whatever it is that I did get from it. And the first thing that I did get from it is that it was that tearing off the Band-Aid. And so no matter how bad this story came out and the feedback is like, the judges are probably like, why did this person enter this contest? I'm sorry, I can't stop laughing. It's so funny to me. One of the reasons this is really funny, let me just say, is that I'm fairly certain, I wish I could remember, I wish I recorded something. I'm fairly certain that I felt at least minorly confident about this story when I submitted it. Oh my gosh, which is going to lead to one of the things that I'm grateful for. So here's the thing. I'm thankful to the story, like I said, number one, that it served its purpose in tearing off that Band-Aid and getting me back to my writing with a project that wasn't near and dear to my heart, but just something that could be a throwaway. And then I was just back in the saddle and ready to go. But the second thing is all of the things that I have learned in this process. So bad writing can serve us because just like any mistakes that we make, mistakes are always learning experiences. So if you have a huge chunk of bad writing, there's lots and lots to learn from it. So the number one thing that is, I can't say that I learned it for the first time, but it was such a great reminder, is how powerful time away from your writing is when you are looking to do a revision. Like I said, when I submitted this story, there wasn't at least an ounce of confidence that, like, yeah, that's a pretty cool story. Meanwhile, flash forward to when we're in the week that results are coming back. I pull the story out from my desktop, read it, and I am completely befuddled by the words on the page. I am the same person that wrote that felt slightly confident about it. And here I am reading it saying, no, Nicole, this is not clear. So, in a contest like the 250 word contest where you have 24 hours, you don't really have too much of that opportunity. But I typically try to embed that in my process anyway, where I will write a story early in the day, do something else, get my mind off of it, walk away, and then come back to it. And I am fairly certain I did not do that this time, and it shows. So that's a huge huge learning experience and a reminder that it should be embedded in whatever way you can. The second thing is how important reading aloud is and how much it can also alter your perception of a story. So some of the things that I think happened in my read aloud, like I said, I read the words on the page and they just weren't popping for me, but when I recorded myself reading it, it definitely had a different life and an understanding to it. So what happens? There's inflection in the dialogue. There is even inflection in the narration that I was giving as I was reading aloud. And so one has to ask themselves, how do you translate that into text? And can it be done or can it not be done? And, there are times like that, like I said before, that a different medium may serve the text. Whether it's an audio story or a visual story like a screenplay, that's a different animal really than just pure text. So something to think about, but reading aloud is in and of itself just a powerful tool for learning more about your story, either what works and what doesn't work, or in this case what it needs. If reading aloud works and reading silently does not, there's a conversation to be had there about what is needed and what's not needed. And the final big lesson that I took away from this story, which I know, but this was a story that exemplified it for me so clearly, is that sometimes going experimental isn't worth it. So I did a double experiment here by doing the story from the point of view of an addict. And then I also did second person POV, which is something that, I'm not proficient at. I've had some fun with it here and there, definitely in the flash and micro fiction more than anything else. But it did not serve this story. At least not in this iteration. See, that's a thing. I feel like I can't let this one go. I probably should. But, yeah, I might not be able to. So what do you do when your writing sucks? Or when is the last time that you could objectively say, holy cow, this totally sucked? And was it just the first draft of something and you were like, that's fine because I know I'm coming back to it? Or have you been in this experience like I was, which is seriously so funny to me, that you actually submitted something that was objectively horrible? I did it. My writing sucked. It got submitted, and I do have feedback from that. I should pull out the feedback and read it aloud. I don't even remember. Oh, it's in my email. Anyway, it doesn't make sense without the story. They could have just said, thanks, this sucked. And at this point, I would have said, you're right. Sorry for wasting your time. Well, all the more reason I need that critique crew on it right away so that I'm not doing this alone, because this is really it again, right? This was a situation where I was writing alone. I was kind of up against the wall with that. I mean, in the past, we've had different Marco Polo groups where we've shot each other's stories and even in a 24-hour contest, not been alone. But I was just like, I just need to do this. Let's see what happens. And look at what happens. Look at what happens when I'm left to my own devices. Stop writing alone, Nicole. So I'm not going to do this anymore alone. We're going to build a critique crew. We're going to build a group where we can have conversations about our writing and pull out all of these meaty details when needed before submitting. So again, if you're interested in joining that conversation and looking at what a critique group will look like amongst this community, please come join me on January 25th. I'm going to have 2 different Zoom calls just to discuss this process moving forward. One is at noon and the other is at 7 p.m. and those are Eastern time. But head over to stopwritingalone.substack.com. find the post on the Critique Crew to get the information about that, or just subscribe and you will get the update when we are ready to go to the meeting. And yeah, that's it. I thank you so much for listening. I hope I amused you a little bit with my story of my sucky writing. I promise to do better. I'm gonna go revise something now. I have a write-in tonight, so yeah, it should be fun. Thank you as always for listening, and I will talk to you again next week.